Information Technology Leaders is sponsored by the Microsoft Corporation, a worldwide leader in software, services, and Internet technologies for personal and business computing. Microsoft offers a wide range of products and services designed to empower people through software, anytime, any place, and on any device. This week on Information Technology Leaders, John Connors, Senior Vice President of Finance and Administration and the Chief Financial Officer at the Microsoft Corporation. Now, here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the Senior Vice President of Finance and Administration and the Chief Financial Officer of the Microsoft Corporation. In this role, he's responsible for finance, operations, IT, investor relations, and real estate. To say the least, it's a big job. Yet I tend to think of him as Microsoft's first successful Chief Information Officer, a role he held several years ago. This is no small feat for a non-technical person in a company of over 30,000 technologists who think they can do the job better and aren't shy about saying so. That seemed to epitomize who he is, a man who built a career methodically, step by step, following the very basic principles of hard work, intelligence, respect, honesty, and passion. Please welcome John Connors.
Well, thank you, Laura. That's probably a nice intro that I sent you to read, so thanks very much.
You did not. I wrote it all by myself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a town in eastern Montana called Miles City. And if you've ever seen the movie Lonesome Dove or read the book, it's a story of Texas cattlemen moving their herds north to Montana. My hometown is the end destination. It's still the cow capital of the West.
And what was it like growing up there?
I think it was probably one of the greatest towns you could be raised in. The population then was about 10,000 people, and my father was a very successful high school basketball, football coach and teacher, and my mother worked at a newspaper. I had 6 brothers and sisters, and it was the kind of town that your parents didn't have to keep track of where you were. The high school and the school in general was the focal point of the community, and it was a little bit of Americana, so just a great place to grow up.
Is it still like that today?
It's still like that today, but it's about 8,900 people, and like much of the Midwest or the Rocky Mountain states that are agriculture in nature, the average per capita income has actually dropped quite a lot compared to the national average over the last 30 years. But it's still a great town, and my kids love going back there.
And what are some of the values that you picked up from there?
Probably the values that stick to my mind the hardest first are just hard work. You're expected, whether you're working on the railroad, whether you're working as a wheat farmer, a cattle rancher, people there just work hard, and it's expected that you work hard. The second value that I think is really something I hold dear is being a straight shooter, telling people what you think, but also treating people the way you would want to be treated. And then I think lastly, people have a very optimistic outlook. I think Montanans in general do, because nature is such a key part of your environment that it was hard not to be an optimistic person growing up in that area.
Yeah. Interesting. What were you like in high school?
I think I was probably fairly serious. I was not really focused on academics as much as I was when I went to college. I was very competitive in sports. And I think I could be a bit cantankerous at times. My sisters sometimes remind me that I was the brother from hell, but mostly I think it was their problem, not mine.
Of course.
So I think I was probably a fairly serious kid that always had a job and was always in sports.
And when did you first know you were smart?
Well, you know, my parents were both very, very interested in all of us being readers, and they also liked to debate. And when you had 7 kids and 2 parents, and we'd sit down at a big dinner table, it was like the Last Supper. And we would debate politics or sports or boyfriends of my sisters. And I think I learned very early on, because I had 3 older sisters, to argue fairly well. And then I think I learned in grade school that I had a good capacity for reading and a good memory. And I think probably the time it was cemented that I could do what I needed to do academically was in about 6th grade from a nun at a Catholic grade school I went to, who gave me a very hard time for not having the highest grade in the class. And at that point, I knew that she saw something that had a different level of expectation than maybe I had set for myself. And so I knew at that point that if I worked hard and stayed focused, good things could happen.
So where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. My grandmother had lived in Missoula, and so as a kid we'd always visit, and I always liked Missoula. And when I got to the end of high school, I had the misguided notion that I wanted to be a lawyer, and the University of Montana had a pretty good law school, so I went to the University of Montana with the intent of studying economics and history in undergrad and then going on to law school from there.
Didn't happen.
It did not. After my second year of college, as I was studying different law school curriculums, one thing that they mention throughout most of the curriculums is that it's very beneficial to take an accounting course or two. So the following semester I took an accounting class, and I liked the accounting mostly because Montana has a very competitive accounting program. And in fact, last year Montana was #1 in the CPA pass rate of all colleges in the United States. And so it has an excellent accounting program. And I decided at that point to switch my major to accounting, still with the intent of going to law school. And then by the time I got through the rigor of studying the accounting and taking the CPA exam, I decided I did not want to go to law school and would pursue a business career.
And what was your first job after college?
My first job was with Deloitte Haskins and Sells in Seattle, Washington.
And were you actively recruited? How did that whole process work?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I had signed up for a series of interviews with what at the time was the Big 8. And the partners or managers would visit the campus. And I made a mistake in that I signed up for the Denver office of Deloitte Haskins and Sells, because at that time Denver was a pretty active economy because the oil economy was strong. A lot of Montana grads that I knew had gone there. And I had made a mistake, or they had made a mistake in the placement office, and they had me signed up with Seattle.
Funny.
And I hit it off real well with the partner, Mike Frankfurter. And by the end of our interview that ended up going longer than planned, I had a good inclination that I would have a job. So I came out of that interview and canceled all the rest of my interviews except one with Touche Ross, because I had to go to the Touche Ross interview to find out how much these accounting firms in Seattle actually pay, because I was, you knew you never asked the people what their pay was going to be. So within about 5 minutes of the interview with the Touche Ross manager, 5 minutes into it, I asked him, how much do you guys pay anyway? And so at that point...
Never do that. Never do that.
So at that point, I knew my opportunity with Touche Ross was limited, but I did extract from the manager approximately how much they paid. And life goes full circle, because I then joined Microsoft and moved up in the finance organization. Well, the Touche Ross manager was then a Deloitte Touche partner on the Microsoft engagement, so I still get a big kick out of telling that story to him whenever I see him. But that's how I ended up at Deloitte Haskins and Sells.
That's great. You said that you had a lot of jobs through high school, but it's always very different when you're in your first professional experience. What sort of surprised you about that experience?
The biggest surprise to me was there were several surprises. I think one was the extraordinary professionalism that was instilled in the firm, in terms of the way you interacted with clients, the way you interacted with peers, the way you interacted with management. The emphasis on professionalism was very high. The second big difference was I had to wear a suit every day, and prior to joining Deloitte, I wore suits only to funerals for relatives. And I think the last thing was the high level of ambition that people in the firm had for their careers, and the extent to which you could learn working for a big accounting firm. In many ways, I think it's almost an on-the-job MBA program. And so those were things I hadn't really been expecting, because I hadn't had that much exposure to a big accounting firm.
Yeah. Yet it sounds like it was such a wonderful experience. What made you decide it was time to leave?
Well, we had at that time, Deloitte had a client called Safeco Corporation, and Safeco was, as you know, right here in the Ave. I got assigned to the Safeco audit, and it turned out the person who was at that time their corporate controller was a Montana guy who'd gone to the University of Montana, and one of my uncles had been his coach in college in Montana, and so he was really probably one of the first mentors I had in my professional life. An opportunity arose at Safeco, and so I joined Safeco in 1986. And Safeco is also a company that has a deep tradition of very strong professional employees, great development, great training, and is a very well-run company. And so that was a good opportunity for me to join Safeco at that time.
Interesting. Before you went to Microsoft, you were at 3 companies, Deloitte, PIP, and PIP Printing, and Safeco. I'm wondering what you learned during those experiences that really prepared you for your Microsoft job.
I think probably there were a couple of key things that were consistent across each of them. The first was that there is absolutely no substitute for hard work. That the people that are successful in any profession, in any walk of life, you have to work very, very hard to be successful. I think the second thing that really became clear to me was that you can learn something from every manager that you interact with and every manager you see, both good and bad. And the third key thing that was really important was it was evident that the people that had the most success were able to communicate effectively, both written and orally. And to the extent you can communicate with people and connect with people, business is at the end of the day a people business. That really became clear in each of those 3 experiences.
So what was your Microsoft interview like?
Well, the Microsoft interview, I might have had a little bit of an advantage in that my wife, how I got the interview or got the introduction to Microsoft was my wife had a girlfriend from the University of Washington who joined Microsoft on the day after Black Friday and was in charge of Microsoft Stock Option Administration. And so we met Sharon at a party in 1988, and we wanted to move back to the Seattle area, and she got me the first contact. Then secondly from there, a gentleman named Rick Devenuti, who's now our CIO, who was a colleague of mine at Deloitte Haskins & Sells and also a University of Washington graduate, he was the hiring manager, and he was real straight and candid, and we knew each other well. Probably the thing that struck me the most about the whole interview process was first and foremost the extent to which the human resources professional really drilled you with questions. Most of my job interview and experiences had been that the human resources person would orient you, would give you a perspective. Well, they did that, plus they drilled you on all sorts of questions to figure out if you'd be a fit. The second thing that was interesting was how you moved from person to person in the interview process, and somehow the person A would tell person B, would tell person C, that by the time you got to person D, they knew everything that A, B, and C had said, and were asking you questions on points that they thought were either weaknesses or strengths. And so it felt a little bit like going through the ringer by the time you were done. But in hindsight, and in the 13 years I've been at Microsoft, our interview process for really testing and ensuring that people are the right fit and the right kind of mental frame is really part of the reason the company's been so successful, that there are very few hires that don't turn out.
Yeah, I remember mine. I was doing the similar kind of thing. I did 9 interviews in one day, and at the end of it, I found myself saying, did I already tell you this story? Did we already talk about this?
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't remember what I had said to whom.
Yeah.
And you do get sort of bleary-eyed by the end, but I think they're looking for that level of stamina.
And focus.
As well,
Yeah.
the ability to focus. So you were hired in as a retail account manager. What was that job about?
Well, that was a job that was in the finance group, the accounting group, and it was a great job to come into Microsoft for the following reasons. First of all, I had responsibility for the accounting for all of our marketing, and at that time, the overwhelming majority of our marketing spend was done out of our product groups. And so I had the great fortune of meeting a large number of our product managers who then became executives. Brad Chase is a good example, Pete Higgins, Hank Vigil, Robbie Bach, a wonderful guy who died a couple years ago named John Nielsen. So as I go through that list of product managers who were about my age, about my level of experience, that I first worked with when I joined Microsoft, that was a great advantage. Secondly, the job included cost accounting for all of our manufacturing sites. And while cost accounting doesn't sound glamorous or real intellectually stimulating on the surface, the fact you have to understand every single product, what's in its bill of materials, and you have to learn the distribution channel gave me a really big advantage as I moved on, in that I understood our products, I understood how they were built, I understood how they were priced, I understood how we sold them. And that was a great foundation for future jobs in the company.
Yeah. But a year and a half later, you became the business manager for the systems division. What was that job about, and how did that come about?
Well, there was a gentleman named Tony Audino who ran Microsoft's tax group, and he moved over into the systems division working for Steve Ballmer. In basically, his job was to manage our relationships and contract with IBM. Tony and I had met shortly after I joined Microsoft, and Steve's staff office had an opening with Tony working for basically the running of the systems division. And that was probably a tremendous break for me in my career, in that I moved over, worked as the business manager in the systems software division, and in a lot of ways, which is, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I was kind of Steve Ballmer's gopher. And I worked on everything from the space plans to the business plan. When new executives would get hired, whether it was Jim Alchin or Brad Silverberg, my job was to get them oriented. We worked on the reorganizations of where do people go when we turn things upside down, and as you know from your Microsoft days, reorganizations
Every 2
happen
years.
With a fairly predictable pattern.
Yeah.
And then I also worked on any projects that Steve had. And getting to know Steve and developing a relationship with him was a great foundation for my Microsoft career for a number of years after that.
You then moved and became the director of business operations. What did that involve?
Well, that was when Steve moved over to run the sales and services organization. I moved over with him. And again, it was a staff position. And we worked on a couple of key things. The first thing we worked on was getting all of our businesses around the world on a consistent measurement scheme. Steve is a very analytic, very methodical, very objective setting kind of guy. And he wanted all of the businesses around the world to have a common measurement model. The second key thing we had to work on was figuring out, when PC manufacturers ship machines, where do they get purchased by consumers and businesses? Prior to this OEM sell-through model we developed, all we knew is what they sold. We didn't know what countries the PCs ended up in. And if you don't know what countries the PCs end up in and what the installed base is, it's hard to set quotas and sales goals for people. So that was a project. We also worked on the early stages of developing a multi-company, multi-division, multi-national licensing scheme, so that companies like Accenture, companies like Boeing, companies like Shell Oil could buy software from us in any location in the world under a common contract. And finally, we worked on what we called at that time the solution provider channel, which was figuring out how do we build a channel of third-party system integrators and resellers to work with Microsoft to design, develop, and support our technology. And today that solution provider channel represents, there's about 2 million people that wake up every day whose primary means of earning income is designing, developing, or supporting Microsoft solutions.
And that became kind of core to their strategic direction.
Yeah, the decision that Bill and Steve made was that the channel would be a great asset for Microsoft. And if you look at our balance sheet today, there are two very important things that don't show up. The most important is the intellectual property of the 50,000 plus people we have, which I think is probably the key reason we have such a large market capitalization. The second key asset that doesn't show up on our balance sheet is our solution provider and our partner asset that has really been absolutely critical to the company's growth and success.
It's all about leverage.
Absolutely.
So this role eventually ended up transitioning to your going to Europe. How did you like working abroad?
It was fascinating, and it was as great an experience personally as professionally. My wife and I had 2 young sons at the time, so we lived in Paris. And Paris is not a bad city. There's a lot worse places you could live than Paris. And it was a great personal experience and a great professional experience. From a Microsoft perspective, I think it was very valuable in that I learned what it was like to not be in the headquarters. And I think I developed an empathy and a network of relationships that people knew in Europe. I understood the challenges they faced, and I think I'm still not viewed as completely a corporate guy because I spent some time in Paris. Secondly, it was very valuable professionally to see a leader like our President of Europe, Bernard Vernier, and how he ran that multilingual, multicultural organization and the different perspectives you have to bring to dealing with people from different nationalities and from different languages. That was a great learning experience.
Because we tend to think of Europe as one place.
Exactly.
They don't think of it as one place.
No, in fact, the Vice President of our operations, Kevin Dillon, was in town recently, and I had not realized that our Europe, Middle East, and Africa geography that we now call EMEA represents 87 countries and nearly as many languages. And so it's fascinating, the diversity.
When you did move back, you took on a general manager level role. How did that differ from some of the director level roles you'd had before?
When I moved back from Europe, that was the first big management job I'd had at Microsoft, in that it was a group that I believe, if I remember right, there were 163 people in the group when I moved back to manage. And managing managers as opposed to having a staff position or managing a smaller group where I was the manager, that was a big difference. The second key...
How was that different?
The level of hands-on involvement you'd have with objectives and issues was at least one level abstracted, because it's a fine balance when you're managing managers in that you want to have enough connection to your overall group that people get to know you and understand the overall group objectives, but you also have to empower the managers that work for you to do their job. And that balance of knowing when to be involved and when to empower, that's one you only develop with experience.
Yeah.
There's maybe a few people that are born with it in their DNA, but I think becoming a good manager is learned and developed, not necessarily something innate. That was a challenge in terms of that right balance between what do you allow your managers to lead and direct versus what do you lead and direct. The other challenge in that role was keeping a large organization moving forward against a common set of objectives when each of the groups had their own set of objectives underneath the overall group plan. And that was something that was a great experience to basically develop. The job was a challenging job in that the company had undergone so much growth in terms of revenue, geography, people, that we had a lot of re-engineering of our financial operations and processes that had to be done, and we had a lot of re-engineering of leadership that had to be done. And doing both of those simultaneously made for a pretty fun and exciting period of time.
So you left the job as the GM of Worldwide Financial Operations, and then you became the corporate controller. And what was the difference between being the controller at Microsoft and being controller at Pitt Printing, where you had worked previously?
You know, the general requirements are similar. PIP was a very successful publicly traded company that then went private, but it was small. I believe when I left it was about $50 million in revenue. When I became corporate controller of Microsoft, I think we were about $7 billion in revenue, and we were growing very rapidly. The common elements of having an appropriate measurement system in place, an appropriate control framework in place, were quite similar. The difference with Microsoft is we were having to scale up our people, our processes, and our ability to support the diversification campaign that had started with servers, with MSN, that it was really a rapid growth period in terms of bringing on senior level managers, building new systems, and doing a very good job of meeting external requirements. So the job was similar, but the scale was quite different. It's probably analogous to playing in in a small college football versus the NFL. Microsoft is more like the NFL.
Yeah, they're both football, but yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What did you like best and least about the controller position?
The best part of the job by far was the team of managers we had and the incredible amount of change we were affecting. We went over a 2.5-year period from having a relatively underdeveloped organization and systems architecture to having probably as strong an organization and as good a financial information infrastructure as any multinational on the planet. That was really fun. The part that wasn't fun was seeing the toll that it took on a few people in terms of the amount of hours of work we had and the stress that some people had. And when you would have people decide because they could afford to retire that you really liked and were really close to, that's a bummer. So the great part about it was the people and building something really big. The negative part was when people would say, you know what, I think it's time for me to move on, because I didn't want them to move on. That was probably the negative part.
How did you end up getting selected to be CIO when you have no IS background?
It goes back to when I was corporate controller, and when I moved into the job, we had a relatively underdeveloped organization and financial information infrastructure. And because of the great team I had and the great team in IT, the team built something that was really great. I mean, it was stuff our salespeople could sell. It was stuff that a controller from another company, a CFO, could come in and they'd look at what we had and they'd say, I want one of those. And it was really great to see that big breakthrough. And there are people like Scott Boggs and Bob Lunn and Greg Harmon, many others that, Taylor Haas, that really made that happen. And they made me look good. And so I think the senior execs, Bob Herbold, Steve Ballmer, thought, well, you did it in finance, I'm sure you can do it in IT. And so they approached me about taking the CIO job. I was very reluctant because the acronym of CIO, career is over, does ring true in a lot of Fortune 500 companies. But in hindsight, I'm glad I took it.
Yeah. Did you have a hard time getting respected by the IT folks?
Oh yeah, very hard. I can remember the first meetings I would go to, and there's the group of people that, because you're the new boss, they'll tell you whatever they think you want to hear. And then there's the engineers, whether it's network engineers, operations engineers, telecom engineers. And I can remember the first couple meetings of going to meetings with those folks, and one thing I pride myself on is I can read people pretty well. And you could just look at them as you're talking, and they could burn a hole right through you with their eyes. And basically what they're saying is, this guy has no chance of making it, and we're not going to do anything to help him make it. And so it was the first 6 to 9 months. There was a lot of waking up in the middle of the night, worried. And I would get up and I'd read, network handbooks, and I would read application architecture guides. And finally, after about 9 months, I knew enough about the job that they couldn't BS me in budget reviews on things that they needed. And the real breakthrough was when the head of our telecom group was proposing in his telecom budget, like $462,000 for echo cancelers. And I had started getting Telephony magazine, so I knew what an echo canceller was. And I said, wait a minute, Scott, why are we buying echo cancelers? Doesn't GTE and Qwest and all these, or US West, put those in their network? And his boss looked at him with a big smile. He said, well, yeah, they do, but if we did it, the sound would be even, less problem. And I said, well, call them up and tell them that's got to be part of their service agreement. So at that point, I knew enough about the technology that I was going to survive and be able to maybe make some change for the good for the overall organization.
Can you tell us about a day in the life of a Microsoft CIO?
It's a fascinating job in that there are a large number of highly talented technologists and engineers. And as the company has moved further and further into the enterprise, there's a lot more people that know a lot about the enterprise. In 1996, when I moved into the job, the company's understanding of the enterprise was relatively immature, but people's opinions about the enterprise and IT were quite evolved. And so the key thing that I learned was when to take a complaint or input seriously, when to ignore it, and when to blast back. Because at Microsoft, because of the anonymity of email, you get a lot of people with strong opinions who will send you a choicely worded email that they would never pick up the phone or never confront you in person. So I learned fairly quickly how to do the sort. Secondly, I really learned that the CIO job is really a lot more about broad general management skills than it is technology. And finally, I learned that we had an unbelievably talented group of people that once we had a common set of objectives and a common direction and a budget to support it, man, they did phenomenal things. But it probably, looking back in terms of the combination of technology, the combination of general management, the combination of having thick-skinned, it's probably one of the most complicated jobs in a company. It's not the CEO job, and there's lots of complications with that, but it clearly is one of the most complicated roles in any organization.
Why do you think you were successful in that role where other people before you weren't able to be?
Well, I think in hindsight, I think those people were wildly successful. They just weren't perceived as successful, and part of it was the company's understanding of the complexity of running a broad-scale IT ecosystem wasn't very evolved. And as we sold more and more product into the enterprise on the server side, people began to really understand, whoa, these customers have all this feedback for us, and our IT folks seem to make it work. They must be pretty good. And then as the IT people began to get involved in the sales cycle, because it didn't take long before our sales folks figured out IT people help them sell product if they bring the customers to Microsoft, that developed a level of respect. And then we introduced this thing we call eating our own dog food, which was using our large IT ecosystem as a beta site, essentially. And that helped to further the ties with the product groups. But if I look at the challenge that a couple of predecessors had, in hindsight, they did remarkable jobs. But part of what a job of a manager is or an executive is, you have to be sure that the perception is aligned with the reality. because that's just, it's like politics. What people think, it matters.
Right. Do you think the fact that you had a prior relationship with Bill and Steve made a difference to your kind of credibility in that role?
I don't think it necessarily did with Bill or Steve, in that they would have expected results, but it probably really helped with other people in the company, because they would understand that you have a level of support and you have a level of dialogue, particularly with Steve, that helps you be successful. But mostly, I think people understood that I just wanted to do a good job, and that I would make the changes in leadership or the changes in the initiatives to get it done. And we also had an ample budget to do things.
Right.
And so the alignment of the people and the timing and the improvement in our own enterprise technology all kind of lined up the right way.
Do you remember your first meeting with Bill?
I do remember it well. I was working for Steve in Steve's group as the business manager, and Steve had a meeting with Bill to take him through his headcount plans for the following year. And I had created this headcount report, basically, that told Steve what he had in his R&D groups by user education, by program management, by product development, by test, in every single organization. And at that time, we didn't have very sophisticated headcount reporting, and this took a lot of time and effort to do it. And it also showed what the applications division had. And so Steve drugged me along to have the meeting with Bill, and that was a great introduction, because first of all, Steve was a couple minutes late, and first thing he did was apologize to Bill for being late, and I hadn't seen him apologize to people for being late and mean it.
Yeah.
At least, and here he meant it, so I was really clear, I understand who the boss is. Then the second thing was Bill's ability to take a piece of information with lots of number and lots of data that he had never seen before and get from point A to point B. It was remarkable. And then lastly, he found it very useful and wanted Mike Maples, who ran applications at the time, to start producing the same thing. And I think Steve was real happy because we'd come up with it before Maples had, because Maples was a pretty legendary manager of people at Microsoft and of process, just a great leader. And Steve had trumped him on that one.
So you like that?
So it was a really unique thing. And I'm sure I called my folks and told them, hey, I had a meeting with Bill that I went to with Bill Gates today.
And I survived it.
Yeah.
And was it different working with him when you were CIO?
It was quite different, because when I was working in the systems division as a business manager, I was a staff guy, and I wasn't responsible for running a group. As I moved into the CIO role, I was responsible for managing a group that impacted the performance, productivity, and results of lots of people, most importantly, the people that have developed Microsoft's products. So he was keenly interested in that. Secondly, he really began to develop an interest in how we did things in IT in order to translate that to our product group. And so the level of expectations were remarkably different, and the level of thinking that was expected from you and your leadership team was quite different than when you were in a staff role.
I remember hearing you say several times that when you go into a meeting with Bill Gates, you need to be more prepared than he is smart.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, Bill and Steve are both at a level that you're just, I don't think you could find another company or organization that has two people with the combination of raw intellect, industry experience and context, work ethic, as well as passion for what they're doing. It's a remarkable combination. And so that, combined with the information landscape and canvas they have from seeing all of Microsoft in the outside world, when you go into a meeting or a session on almost any topic, you really need to have thought through multi-dimensions. You have to have thought through how does it connect to other things that they might have learned from this area or project. And mostly you have to be prepared to be absolutely, totally honest about your own point of view as well as your position. And if there's times when you don't know something, they just expect you to say, you know, I don't know, I'll get back. If you go down the path of trying to convince them of something that you're not really solid on, it's a foundation that's easily cracked. So you really have to be prepared. And the farther up I've moved into the company, you also really have to appreciate their time and the incredible, almost inhuman demands they have, both time-wise, stress-wise, and expectation-wise from people inside and outside of Microsoft. So that's probably something I've really learned is to try to really respect their time.
At a certain point, you were asked to move out of the CIO role and to take on the role of the VP of Worldwide Enterprise. Were you feeling ready to leave the CIO role at that point?
No, I probably really, at the point that I moved on to the enterprise group, I really at that point I think knew the job well and was comfortable in the job. And so I really wasn't looking to make a move, nor was I particularly anxious to make a move, but the request for a move was made, and so I was willing to do it. And fortunately, Rick Devenuti moved in to do the CIO job, and in a lot of respects he's done it much better than I have, and has been a remarkable salesperson and advocate for the company internally and externally. But I was feeling pretty comfortable at that point when I moved on.
And how did that role end up working out for you?
It was fascinating. It really was an eye-opener for a couple of reasons. First of all, it gave me a perspective of the competitive pressure and the challenge Microsoft faces in the enterprise. If you look at where we were in the spring of 1999, competitively versus where we are today in the enterprise space, we were in much less good shape than we are now. It also gave me a great perspective for the skills it takes to be a successful salesperson and to motivate people successfully day after day. It also allowed me to have great exposure to our partner asset and our channel. And it really made me appreciate how difficult it is for someone to be a successful sales leader over a lengthy period of time. If you look at companies, and I don't care what industry it is, if someone is able to successfully lead the sales organization in a publicly traded company for a multi-year period, you have to look at that person and say, man, they're doing something right as a manager, because it's extraordinarily difficult to keep growing revenues regardless of the industry you're in.
And it sounds like all of those things kind of prepared you for the role you have now, and I listed all the responsibilities. Are you enjoying having that larger scope of responsibility?
Well, there's days I'm enjoying it, and days I'm not. When the
Really?
The days when when the company we had some dark days in 2000. 2001 has been a much brighter year, particularly relative to the technology companies that imploded. But there were some difficult days. I think the thing that I try to do, I try to look at how were some people I know who have managed large organizations been successful. And I look at my previous boss, Bob Herbold, our former chief operating officer, who's now retired, and he was so efficient and effective in the way that he spent his time and the way that he managed managers. And so I think I'm probably doing an adequate job with certain groups. There's other groups that I don't feel like I'm probably adding the level of time or impact that I wish I could or should, but there's always tomorrow to improve it.
Now, IT reports to you, so you sort of had about a year away, and now it's sort of your problem again. Are you more critical of them having been in that role, or are you more understanding of the challenges they face?
I think I'm much more understanding of the challenges they face, and probably also benefit from the fact that Rick, our current CIO, is deeply experienced, deeply connected to the company, and highly talented. So the area that I probably can help there is being an advocate for the group, and also working to ensure that, you know, as we move to being a larger company across multiple business divisions, how are we organized? What are our work processes? What are our operating mechanisms so that IT is effective in a diverse company?
Do you think that you're a better manager or leader?
I'm probably a better leader than manager in that I can get bored with the necessary and important administration of running a group, but I can get up and juice people pretty well and stimulate people to do better pretty effectively.
What keeps you motivated? I know you talked about how you deal with stress, but how do you stay motivated day in, day out at this point when you could be doing anything you want?
Well, first of all, we're not the largest market cap company in the world. As of this afternoon at 1:15, GE was 7.2 billion ahead of us, about. When I moved into the CFO job, we were the highest market cap company in the world. I think our stock was dramatically overvalued at the time, along with the rest of the tech sector. We took a big drop, but we've been fighting our way back, and now we're within spitting distance of GE.
Again.
You know, getting the company back to its deserved position. That's you know, a goal, but the stock price itself isn't a goal. It's how do people ascribe value to the company. I think the second thing that is really motivating is it's really important that your family and your kids see that you are an example and that you have a life and that you set goals and you work hard towards those goals. I think the third thing that motivates me is Microsoft is a very unique place, and the level of commitment and passion and we can do it attitude is really inspiring. And I look at the success the company's having with our initial foray into the games business. While we're in the second inning of a 9-inning game that might have extra innings, we're in the game. And 18, 24 months ago, we weren't even in the business. And when you see the magic of a guy like Robbie Bach and his Xbox division go from nothing to something, it's pretty remarkable. If you look at the fact that 3-4 years ago, we were nowhere in the enterprise space really, other than selling some NT servers and selling SQL Server at the divisional level. Well, now people look and they say, it's kind of a Microsoft IBM race the next 10 years. If you look at the success that the company has had changing the world through the desktop computer, it's something. If you look at the consumer services and you say, man, we're finally in the game against AOL, it's really remarkable to see all this stuff happen and to think, man, I work at this place. So it's not hard to be motivated at a place like Microsoft. The hardest part is just how are you allocating your time to do enough to do your job well, to do enough to be with your family, and to carve out enough personal time. That's the time allocation challenge.
The thing that always amazes me is that Microsoft always approaches things as though it is the underdog. And it did when I was there, and it's still doing that, which I find is probably one of the most remarkable things about the company.
Well, and in many ways we are. If you look at the desktop business, you could look and say, geez, how could you guys feel you're an underdog? Well, how do you grow two of the most successful business franchises in the history of man? How do you reinvent the way people use the computer as their primary communications device? How do you reinvent the way people work so that Office continues to be successful? I mean, that's a challenge.
Right.
If you look at the enterprise, I mean, you look at Oracle, you look at Sun, you look at IBM, and then all the other kind of mid-tier players, man, oh man, we are the underdog. If you look at AOL and the lead they had on us in consumer services, if you look at the gaming business and two companies like Sony and Nintendo, and you just start going down the list, it's easy to look at our financial success and our balance sheet and say, oh, you know, these guys don't have any problems, no challenges. But the reality is, to be successful on multiple fronts at the level that Microsoft is successful and can be successful, man, it's a big challenge.
What does it take for an employee to be successful at the company?
First and foremost, it takes passion. I think if you're not passionate about technology and what our product people are doing, then you're probably at the wrong place. The day that you're just not juiced about what our people are doing with our products, that's a problem. I think the second key thing it takes to be successful is you have to be a hardworking person, because there's an incredibly large number of talented people, and if you're not working hard, you will not succeed, or you will not succeed relatively. I think the third thing is you have to be a risk taker, meaning you have to be willing to speak your mind. You have to be willing to set big, bold goals that you may not achieve, but if you're not willing to take that risk of doing more than you think you can do, you're not likely on a relative basis to move ahead. And then lastly, I think it takes commitment and an understanding that Microsoft is a place that is very patient with the goals that Bill and Steve set. And you know, if people understand how patient and committed the company is, they're willing to take risks, they'll work hard, and they have passion, I think they can have a great work career and a great life being part of the Microsoft family.
How do you deal with stress?
I get a dog. I mean, quite honestly, about 3.5 years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago, my wife knows and my kids know, I can't remember how our dog is Scobie. A dog is the greatest thing in the world. They're always loyal. They don't give a damn what the stock price is, and they want to go for a walk every night. So if you need a friend, get a dog. That is such a truism. No, I think though the dog helps. The second thing.
Does he come to the office with you?
He does on weekends.
Because there was an email that said we can't. I remember that.
Yeah.
Because I ended up having to bring my cat in one day. This was right after the email that came out saying you're not allowed to bring pets to the office anymore.
Now dogs should be allowed, but not
but
cats.
Not cats.
That's,
All right, we got a problem here.
But it's, no, in reality, I've got a great relationship with my wife, and I've got 4 great kids. And I don't think I take myself all that seriously. And I look and say, man, I'm the luckiest person in the world. Look, I get to have an interview with you. I don't have to worry about my health at this point. I've got a great immediate family and extended family. I've had the great fortune of working for what in my subjective opinion is the most phenomenal company in the history of commerce. To be able to work under and around guys like Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. I mean, our grandkids are going to read about them in their history books. It's you know, sometimes I got to pinch myself. So there's days though when it's stressful.
Yeah.
But you know, there's nothing really good that I can figure out that comes out of life that doesn't have a little bit of work involved. So it's been real fun.
Yeah. We'll be back to take questions from the audience right after this.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
What is one thing that you would wish that you had learned in your college life that would make your transition from Dell Yao to Microsoft smoother?
I wish I had taken more computer programming classes. That's the one thing. I look back on my college career, and I had to take this class, Basic, and I thought it was the worst class that I had to sign up for, because at the time I was an econ and history major, and I really wish I had taken more programming classes, and I wish I had taken them more seriously than how I approached Basic. That's probably the one regret. The other thing that I think is important for college students that you don't really understand until you get into business is the ability to speak effectively orally. And I had a couple of classes in college where you were forced to do it, and I did okay, but when I moved out to Seattle and went to work for Deloitte Haskins & Sells, I joined this club called Toastmasters, and fairly religiously or consistently I made it to a 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. Toastmasters meeting every Wednesday for about a year and a half, and that really proved to be extraordinarily beneficial. Had I not done that and developed confidence in my ability to speak in front of people and a comfort, I probably would put that at the top. But yeah, I think generally I would put the failure to take computer programming classes and the one that I took, failing to take it seriously, as my biggest regret.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to close with a quote from Scott Boggs, who has worked for you for several years. When I think about John Connors, I think of his amazing ability to boil down issues and problems and challenges into 4 or 5 very easy to understand kind of things that people are able to rally around. That gives him the ability to communicate the basics of what those challenges are and what is important. And one of the things that you find around here is that there are always these big ideas, and as an organization, it's hard to keep focused in one direction. John excels at being able to keep everyone focused on what needs to be done. I also think about the amazing way, with relatively little history, he identifies key people. He is a terrific judge of people, being able to identify key roles for those people, even though they haven't proven themselves yet. And with very little exception, most of those end up being excellent choices, and they've shined in their roles. I consider him to be the single most important mentor figure in my life.
That makes my day.
Information Technology Leaders is sponsored by the Microsoft Corporation, a worldwide leader in software, services, and Internet technologies for personal and business computing. Microsoft offers a wide range of products and services designed to empower people through software, anytime, any place, and on any device.